All right, let's jump right in. Today we're going to talk about a guy known as the strongest Zero pilot, Tetsuzo Iwamoto. He's arguably Japan's greatest fighter ace of the Second World War, and his story? Wow. It's an incredible mix of unbelievable skill, a really stubborn sense of pride, and in the end, a whole lot of tragedy.
So what makes him such a legend? Well, it really starts with this number right here, 202. That's how many enemy aircraft he claimed to have shot down. Now, while official records from that time are a bit spotty, this was his personal count, something he wrote down himself in his notebooks. And if it's true, it makes him one of the highest-scoring aces of the entire war, period.
And check out this quote. It really tells you everything you need to know about his mindset. For him, this wasn't just about having good eyesight or being a great pilot in the technical sense. Air combat was something deeper, almost an art form. He said he could feel the enemy, that he could anticipate what they were going to do before they even did it.
Now, his legend was really forged in the skies of the South Pacific, over this fortress island called Rabaul. This is where he went from being just a pilot to becoming something else. He was like a ghost in the sky, a force that people feared because they just couldn't seem to touch him.
I mean, the fear he and his fellow pilots struck into the Allies, you could practically feel it. The Allies were throwing wave after wave of planes at Rabaul, sometimes 1,000 in a single week, but Iwamoto and the tiny Rabaul Air Force fought back so hard that the U.S. military actually thought Japan had 1,000 planes there. The crazy part? They were holding the line with maybe 30 planes. 30!
So how did a guy like this get his start? Well, to really get the ace, you've got to understand the man. And his journey didn't begin with him falling in line. No, it started with a rebellious streak and a will of iron that pretty much defined his whole life.
You know, his father wanted him to stay home, but Iwamoto went behind his back and took the Navy entrance exam. When he got in, he told his parents, "I was born the third son, so I will give this life for my country." And get this, his talent was just obvious, right from the get-go. On his very first combat mission, he shot down 5 enemy planes. By the time the Pacific War kicked off, he was already a decorated ace on the famous carrier Zukaku.
So, here's the million-dollar question. What made him so good? It wasn't just guts. It was something else entirely. It was this cold, calculated, almost scientific way of looking at aerial combat that was just light years ahead of its time.
You know, when we think of dogfighting, we picture these long, swirling battles, planes chasing each other's tails. Yeah, that wasn't Iwamoto's thing at all. To him, that was just messy, inefficient, and way too risky. He perfected a one-hit, one-kill philosophy. He'd use his skill to get above his target, make a single lightning-fast pass, fire one perfect burst right at the cockpit, and then just disappear. It was brutally efficient, and it's what kept him alive. And he wasn't just about the mechanics of the fight. He got into the psychology of it, too. His most famous tactic was called the Okuri Okami, which means sending off wolf. He wouldn't even attack the bombers on their way to the target. Nope. He'd let them drop their bombs, and then he'd stalk them on their way home. He'd strike right when they thought they were safe, when their fuel was low and their will to fight was gone. I mean, that's just pure predator thinking, right?
But Iwamoto's story is about so much more than just tactics. This is where we get into his character, this fierce, unbending code he lived by. And that warrior's pride was about to face its biggest test as the war started to turn against Japan.
So you have to remember, as Japan's losses started piling up, a new, really desperate strategy came into play. The special attack units, the kamikaze. The military began asking its best pilots to basically trade their lives for a single attack.
So when a superior officer comes to him and asks him to volunteer for one of these missions, his answer was just blunt and absolute. He believed his job, his whole reason for being, was to shoot down as many enemy planes as he could and live to fight the next day. For him, a suicide attack wasn't just death. It was a waste of his talent, a betrayal of everything he stood for as a fighter pilot.
Iwamoto made it through the war. He was a master of the sky who survived against all odds. But he was about to find out that the peaceful world he came back to, well, it didn't have a place for a man like him. His greatest fight was still ahead.
Japan surrendered. For millions of people, a nightmare had finally ended. The guns went silent.
For Iwamoto, though, peace wasn't peace. It was a whole new kind of war. He was a man who was built for the sky, and without that, he was just completely lost.
His life after the war, it was just one tragedy after another. The occupation authorities blacklisted him so he couldn't get a government job. He just drifted from one thing to the next. The discipline he'd always known was gone. His health fell apart, a simple appendicitis was misdiagnosed, and it led to one botched surgery after another. Japan's greatest ace died from a simple infection. He was only 38 years old.
And, that really could have been it. His story could have ended there. A forgotten hero who died poor and unknown. But his legacy survived, all thanks to his own obsessive need to document everything and the love of his wife.
See, the thing is, all through those 8 years of fighting, Iwamoto kept these incredibly detailed journals. While he was on his sickbed, he gathered them all into 3 notebooks, logging every single mission, every single kill. After he died, his wife held onto those notebooks for almost 20 years, protecting the story that nobody else knew.
So years later, someone finds these notes. They get published as a book called Zero Sengeki Tsuyo, or Zero Fighter Ace King. And it just became this huge sensation. It finally told the world the full story of this quiet, intense pilot who once ruled the skies. His legend was literally reborn from the pages of his own notebooks.
And that kind of leaves us with this question, right? When you look at a life like his, what's the real measure of a hero? Is it the 202 victories he racked up in the sky? Or was it the guts it took to stand by his principles on the ground, even when it was the hardest thing to do? His story really makes you think that sometimes the greatest battles are the ones we fight with ourselves.